Citrain is many things, Citrain. Citrain is many things, Citrain. Citrain is many things, but it does not stop for English pigs. Citrain is many things, Citrain. Citrain cannot be beaten, Citrain. Citrain cannot be beaten, Citrain. Citrain cannot be beaten. I am Swiss and seeking treatment. Citrain cannot be beaten. Citrain. Citrain will take you far. Citrain. Citrain will take you far. Citrain. Citrain will take you far. Express to the AFR. Citrain will take you far. Citrain. Citrain fera de toi en nom. Citrain fera de toi en nom. Citrain fera de toi en nom. Tu n'as pas besoin de gens. Citrain fera de toi en nom. Citrain fera de toi en nom. Citrain fera de toi en nom. Welcome back, as always, to the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast, episode 25, 714-747. Guys, we have 7 episodes left. Can you believe it? I can't. I'm looking forward to see where we go. This is going to be very, very interesting. I probably say that a lot, but yeah, we are rearing in on the end here. Today's episode is not recorded as I'm talking right now. We have Dave from the Great Concavity podcast. Go check that out. I believe the other host's name is Matt. I'm not sure. Matt wasn't busy. That's the point. Whatever his name was too busy. So we have Dave from the Great Concavity podcast, and we will be, so because he is out there on the West Coast, and because he has those things called children, we're doing a night cast here. That's right. 10:45 right now, Eastern Standard Time. We're going to start in a few minutes. I'll tell you what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about Kate Gompert getting her head smushed by poor Tony, snatching them purses. Oh, poor Tony. When will you learn, you little ragamuffin, you? About Ruth Van Cleve chasing him down. Joelle, Maraith. All your friends in Infinite Jestland. Oh, God, it is freezing outside. Some of you have messaged me wondering how I am, knowing that I'm in Philadelphia, and there was some looting happening nearby. And the truth is, I'm fine, but yes, I am the looting that was happening in Philadelphia was happening 6 blocks from me. Guys, it's weird. It's weird here in Philadelphia just because, listen, I support the Black Lives Matter movement 100%. Yeah, 100%. I don't know why I questioned that for a second. 100%, yeah. But we have gotten the point here where it's a little nihilistic, like the shooting that happened of something Wallace. I don't remember his full name. But yes, the gentleman who was gunned down was in a completely different side of the city, but literally like 1,000 people hopped on the train or hopped in their car and drove 5 miles to the opposite side of the city, and they did all the looting here. Because I think the last time when the protests were getting really bad over the summer, they came and they hit Port Richmond, my neck of the woods, and I think the cops are very caught off guard because we're very far away from the main strip of the city. Like, the subway doesn't come here. The bus lines barely come here. So I think they were very caught off guard. So, yeah, it wasn't – the looting was as opportunistic as it could get because it was people who don't live in this chunk of the city coming here. I mean, I even joked to my girlfriend, like, do we need a TV? Because, I mean, they're breaking into the Target anyway. Like, I jog to that Target every night. I think I could jog back with like smart TV. I don't know. But yeah, so we're fine. It's weird here. When you're listening, we have the big election coming up tomorrow, and wow, I'm looking forward to that. Gonna be a little bit crazy. People get intense here. I live in a Trump neighborhood, which I wonder, like, why do you even still live in a city at this point? These people are like, it's our neighborhood. You know, you're a bunch of transplants. Like, oh, okay, so you never got within 4 blocks away of the house you grew up in, and that makes you entitled to the neighborhood. Gotcha. Understood. City Hicks, I believe they're called. The City Hicks. Yeah, I live in a weirdly immigrant neighborhood, but it's all white. It's like Polish and Eastern immigrant, which, I mean, I am of Polish background. I don't know if I've said it on the podcast before, but yes, I have had people get out of their cars and just start yelling to me in Polish. So I guess I fit in better than I would like. This one's mean, but it's kind of funny. I was visiting my friend Seamus down in South Philly the other day. Shout out Seamus Millar. Look up all his stuff. He's a hilarious comic. Shambles Murph on all his thing. But yeah, we were just sitting there chatting with Seamus, and there was just like a few girls riding by on bikes, and I suddenly stopped and I looked at him like, oh my god, I just realized everybody's ugly in the neighborhood I live in, because I was like, ooh, like checking these girls out and like, wait, I haven't done this in a while. Why is this? Oh yeah, because I live in like the grandma and pierogies and the Trump 2020 flag side of town. Oh, good fun. I have taken to audibly just yelling into houses or at houses that have the Trump flag. It's like they have an American. There's some shit going on here where there's these pamphlets that are all over the street because people just throw them out. And it's just like a thing that hangs on your doors is Donald Trump wants you to make a plan to vote. And the photo, the illustration of Trump in it is like a leaning over, black, shot from underneath, red tie, menacing big brother. Like, they're not even hiding the fucking symbolism anymore. It's a little terrifying. I've told you guys before that I was alt-right when I was young, early 20s. What the fuck did I know? I don't know. But, yeah, I've definitely gone very far outside of it. And I've tried to make the point to people I know, because I have friends who are voting for the guy, and I don't know what's wrong with them. But, I mean, part of it is just, like, this is not, you're sad because your team lost. Like, this isn't a team thing. I would not be terrified if we were in the 4th year of a Romney presidency, you know? This is scary. This is freaky. My fiance, Miss Perry, Footnote episode 1, is freaking the fuck out. I'm just reading the polls to her every day, and she's like, "You're gonna jinx this. Stop." So of course that leads to me saying, like, "I guarantee Donald Trump will lose." Like, just it's fun upsetting people you love, is it not? So that's enough rambling. Guys, check this episode. I guess if America's still here next week. Ooh, this gives us an opportunity for, like, hey, maybe Donald Trump goes crazy and then Canada and Mexico offer to pitch in and the ONAN happens, and then we can turn we can turn fucking Florida into the Great Convexity, you know? Dump the toxic waste. That's where he's going, so we'll dump the toxic waste right along with him, and then we don't have to worry about Florida seceding because nobody wants it anyway. Guys, episode 25. Listen to the Great Concavity podcast, and we're here with, God, I don't even know his last name. I'm going to pause this and get his last name real quick. Dave Laird. Laird. Go follow them on all the things. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'll ask him in 3 minutes when I meet him for the first time. All right, you guys have a nice week. Enjoy your I Hate Infinite Jest podcast. Only 7 left. Enjoy it. Only for a moment, and the moment's gone. See. Also, I keep forgetting I have shit to promote. November 12th, I will be at Workhorse Brewing in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. If you guys want to come see a comedy show, you can look that. If you look up Cricket Comedy online on Facebook, Cricket Comedy, that is Workhorse Brewing in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I will also be at the Pennsauken Country Club for a Survivor Series style roast battle. Ye gods, that's going to be fun. That's going to be myself, Rusty Wright. I think that's the only people that have been on the show that are going to be on it, but it's going to be a few people. Going to be a lot of fun. Going to be at the Pennsauken Country Club Thursday, November 19th in Pennsauken, New Jersey. Follow me at jessedraham, at jessedraham@gmail.com, at Mr. Jesgo, at Diamond Joe Quim. It ain't too much, it's just dirty. Okay, bye. I Hate Infinite Jest, episode 25, 714-747. My guest this week from the Great Concavity podcast, Dave Laird. How are you doing, Mr. Laird?
I'm doing well, Mr. Dram. How are you? Thanks for having me on, man. Good. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you.
Despite my reservations about coming on a show called I Hate Infinite Jest, I've made it pretty clear in the last 5 or so years doing our show, The Great Concavity, that I don't hate Infinite Jest. So, I came quickly to realize that there's perhaps possibly some tongue-in-cheek element to your podcast name, but I'm excited to explore, your feelings now at page 714, 747 compared to, page 1 or 100.
Well,
thanks for having me.
I'm glad you decided to be open-minded and give me a chance. There may have been other podcasters that I invited on who listened to a few episodes and said, "Oh, I don't know if I want to be involved in this sort of thing." Pinch on in public podcast. What?
Oh, Bo Butler. Come on, Bo.
He was really polite, and honestly, I haven't listened to the Pinch on in public podcast, so I don't know. I know we can get a little dirty here. But I mean,
well, I would love to get dirty about pinching in public because those folks and us have a very storied podcast beef that goes back years and years.
I wasn't aware of such a thing.
Bo started it. I might have suggested having it with you based on the title of your podcast, except for we already had a literary podcast beef, so I just totally let it slide, man. So you're fine. We're just gonna be friends, and we'll just dunk on good. Bo.
Yeah, we can double team Pinch on in public. All right,
that's right. Yeah.
I wish I knew.
But Bo actually came on our podcast in I think episode 40 something.
Oh, we didn't have any reservations about you guys. Nice.
And he's actually he's read Infinite Jest quite a few more times than I have actually. So he turned out to be way more of a Wallace weenie than he might otherwise let on. So
now, how many times have you read it?
3 full times. Okay. So, the first time was in end of 2007. I think I finished in January 2008. And then I let it sit for a long time. And then I reread it when I was doing my master's thesis actually on it, which was, I think I started in 2014. And then 2 years later, I got roped into, I say roped in, but I was very happy to do it, to a Infinite Winter online reads. You probably read, I think you've mentioned Infinite Summer on your show before.
Yeah, which obviously just happens to be concurrent with when I'm recording it. That's when that came up. So.
Oh yeah. Nice. So yeah, I was a weekly guide, so I'd write a post every 75 pages, 15 posts or whatever, trying to help people get through the book as well as I could. And so yeah, three full reads, and so getting to read this 30-page section for coming on tonight was a really fun dip back into it, because it's been about 4 years since I've really read any passages at length from it.
Well, see, I'm really hoping that this will be the kind of book, just because it is so mammoth, that I can in the future go back and read parts of it that I like.
Totally. Yeah.
I have.
So here you had 714.
Now,
what's your favorite passage that you think you might revisit at some point?
God. It's pretty hack to say, but probably Gately in the parking lot. That was beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah, just the I love not only the descriptions and the language, but just specifically what this is to this character. That this is a character who has been fighting his natural inclination so long and second guessing himself, and then suddenly he's in a situation where that record needle goes right back into the groove, and he's at peace with violence, because for the first time in a long time, like, oh, I I I I am very stable in this kind of chaos.
Right.
So
like when he's fighting the French Canadians in front of Ennet House. Yeah. That's a pretty nuts scene, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I was very into that. Shit, we went too far. Where can we find you online as far as like hashtag, what am I saying? Hashtag social media.
Cool. Well, our podcast is, which I do with a great friend of mine named Matt Booker. And I met Matt through going to academic David Foster Wallace conferences. So there was a recurring one for a long time at Illinois State University every year. So we met in 2015 there. So our podcast is, our website's greatconcavity.podbean.com. And we're on Twitter at Concavity Show. We're on Instagram at Concavity Show. We're on Facebook. Just search The Great Concavity. Any podcasting platform, search The Great Concavity. You'll find us.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So I wasn't aware you guys were coming out of this as from an academic viewpoint.
Yeah. So like at the time I was doing a master's in English. So I'm not, and I finished there. I didn't go on to do a PhD or anything, and I don't think I ever will. So I've done a bit of scholarship on Wallace. Like I've got a couple, articles published or whatever in books that are specific to David Foster Wallace studies. Matt doesn't consider himself to be an academic at all, but he's worked in publishing for a long time.
Okay.
And actually he's done like quite a few conference presentations at this conference. And, I would more or less consider him to be an academic, but I think he's just being humble about it. But we try to like strike a balance on our show of like appealing to a general fan audience who likes, Infinite Jest, who likes Wallace's work, who likes books in general. Our show tends to be like, Wallace adjacent stuff too. It's not just, we talk about Wallace exclusively every episode for the entire time. Like we have other novelists on our show. We talk about their work. But we try to keep it to like, we think people who dig Wallace would also like this other stuff that's similar, So sometimes we do have guests on that are academic, PhD types, and they've written a whole monograph, an academic book on Wallace's work. But we also have, fans. We have a lot of artists on who've done something cool with Wallace. We have musicians. I mentioned novelists. So quite a range of types of folks who've engaged meaningfully with Wallace's work in some way. So we try to keep it not like super, highbrow academic. Right. We want it to be accessible to, the average person who just likes books,
I gotcha. See, yeah, that was definitely the different angle we had coming into this. My background is obviously comedy. That was what got me into this. I knew several comedians who loved this book, and they happened to be the better educated amongst them. So that's why Dan Ostrov, Steve Clark. I was super upset that. So I'm not sure if you're aware of him, but like in my comedy circle, he's somewhat big. Matt McCusker from Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. He is a massive David Foster Wallace fan.
Okay. I don't know.
Okay. All right. I've danced around this for a lot of. So do you remember about a year ago, there was a guy who got on Saturday Night Live and then immediately lost his job when it was revealed he'd said some pretty over the line shit on a podcast?
No, I don't think I know about this. This guy?
It was said on his podcast. It was the other guy on that podcast. Okay. And that was a weird thing for our circle, because these were like, everybody, like we went to open mics with these guys, and now one of them's on SNL, and now this guy is an international pariah. This is very interesting.
Can you say his name?
Matt McCusker. The other guy is Shane Gillis.
Shane Gillis. Okay.
Yeah.
And Shane Gillis was on SNL briefly.
he never actually got on air. He got fired almost immediately. But I really wanted his podcast partner on because this guy has an incredibly like blue collar background and yet loves this book, which
cool.
is
That's sweet. I love that.
I would have loved to get into it. Unfortunately, he's just been really busy, new dad and all that.
Yeah.
I went off on a whole tangent there, but then again, that's part of the reason you and I. That's part of the reason you and I are recording so late because you also have kids, I believe you said.
Yeah, I got one. I got a 3-year-old, so bedtime out on the West Coast here was not too long ago.
Nice. So how did you initially discover Infinite Jest in the first place? Was that your first introduction to Wallace, or were you aware of him vaguely?
Yeah, it was. I think the way that I kind of got into books, I guess, that are sort of in this wheelhouse is I took a 3rd-year American Lit class, and I am Canadian. I live in British Columbia, so I'm at a Canadian university, and I'm taking an American Lit class, and my professor had us read White Noise by Don DeLillo, and I read that book, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to read and find all the other books that are like this. And so DeLillo was kind of my like gateway drug into the world of literary fiction and like postmodernism and that kind of stuff.
I love when you can find an artist or a piece of art that just like knocks out a genre wall in your life. And now you have a whole new wing to explore. I love that.
Yeah. And that wing has been being explored for, I think I took that class in like 2006. So 14 years later, and I'm still trying to read more and more books, like that one that I read in that class. And at that time, the main sort of way that I was finding more books like White Noise was like my really good friend Nathan was into that kind of literary fiction, and he would be like, oh, check out this book and this person. But I was using Amazon, like, you go to White Noise, people who bought this book also bought.
Oh, okay.
And I kind of just like surfed that for a long time and just found like titles that look cool or books that had a nice cover, and I'd read the description, and then I'd get that book and read that book, and I just kind of kept doing that. Eventually Infinite Jest started to kind of recur in that recommendation section.
So, what's funny, I've read so many posts online of the 2 major pressings of Infinite Jest and hating both the covers. I've heard that a lot, especially like the 25th anniversary one. People that's just white and has the eyeball on it. People hate that thing.
Yeah, I got a free copy of that one as a result of doing the Infinite Winter read. Like they sent one to all of us guides, so I got it. But a really good friend of mine, he's an artist. I met him at the 2015 conference, same one that I met Matt. He has done a great deal of Infinite Jest fan art. Like he's made movie posters for like all of James Incandenza's films. So like every film in the filmography, pretty much my friend Chris Ayers has made like a really amazing, legit movie poster for. So around the time when Little Brown put out a contest for like someone to make the cover for the 20th anniversary edition, and Chris Ayers he found all of the entries and compiled them on his website. So I'll send you the link for that later, and you can put it in your show notes if you want to see like other entries for the 20th edition. But yeah, when it got revealed, like most people that I know in this community were like pretty bummed on how it turned out, because there were some really cool submissions that Chris posted too. I think like, I don't know, 4 years later, I don't feel as bad about the cover as I did initially. Like I remember feeling pretty sad, but it's kind of grown on me a bit, and I'm okay with it. I've made peace with it.
There you go. When there's something you love hiding inside, you'll come around to it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not grotesque. It's not like, when I look at it, I don't think like this is a repugnant piece of art.
Right.
It's not an eyesore. It's just, it could be more compelling, I think is maybe,
especially
it's a bit lacking, I suppose,
especially when you have such a creative fan base out there that is making a lot of art as it like connected to the novel itself. So okay, so you said that you have some questions for me.
Yeah. So I mean, one of them is, now you're like, you're like 4/5 of the way through this book, right?
Oh
For the
yeah.
first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking, okay, on a scale of 1 to like say 11, I'm wondering how much you currently hate Infinite Jest after having gone this far. I know the title is like a bit tongue in cheek, but in your
Mm-hmm.
first episode, you kind of talk about like you hated it the first time, you're willing to give it another shot. You're kind of like, this podcast is like sort of helping you get through the book in a way, right? Helping you
Oh yeah.
to explore your way through the book, getting some help from some pals and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
What's your kind of, where would you put yourself now on that scale?
I think on a scale of 1 to 11, 1 being the least hate, 11 being the most hate.
Yeah, like Spinal Tap hatred, crank it up.
Probably a 4 or a 5.
Oh, okay. That's better than I was expecting.
It's we're subject to change depending
Sure.
on the ending
On the
or
ending,
lack
yeah.
thereof. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's the thing I keep saying is that I think there is a great 400-page story hiding in this 1,100-page book. Now, stuff's happening now, because I'll be honest, up until very, very recently, I just hated all the Incandenzas. Like, I am not interested in you. I do not relate to Hal a little. If you relate to Hal, you're a bad person, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic. But for me, this has been... I have been channel surfing looking for the Don Gately show.
Okay.
And
yeah.
that's
Dawn is like a strong highlight storyline for me as well. And I think a lot of people I know would agree with that too.
Right. But things are coming together. You know what it is? Even seeing how it's put together, my main reason starting this podcast was it wasn't just that I didn't like it. I didn't understand what other people liked about it.
Yeah.
Now I see what other people like about it now, but just the stuff, I am thoroughly not charmed by David Foster Wallace, and I don't know what that is. When I've been feeling mean, what I've been saying is David Foster Wallace did not have any original insight that was not said decades earlier and better.
By like the Russians of the 19th century.
By the Russians, by Vonnegut. But then again, I realize that I read for a very specific thing. I like old men telling me how the world works in tiny little chunks.
Gotcha. Yeah. So like Mark Twain's good for you. He's got all his aphorisms.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I dig Wallace's writing a lot, enough to have been doing a podcast about him for the last 5 years, I suppose. But I don't feel like precious about him in a way that like I'm not offended if someone says they don't like his writing or they're not charmed by it. Like that's totally cool with me. I get it.
Oh, by the way, that is absolutely another impulse with the podcast, which is just I do not like sacred things. So when a lot of people have like kind of lionized him, then it's all the more fun in tearing him down a little bit.
Sure, yeah.
So.
And that's been a really interesting thing to watch develop in the last 12 years since his death too, is the way that he's been kind of valorized or sainted in some ways. Like there was kind of a Saint Dave trajectory on certain pockets of the internet that was starting to emerge, but the last few years have really gone in the opposite direction from that, where Mary Carr, who is a famous poet, she's been quite vocal on Twitter about some of the abuse that she suffered when she was dating him, and some of that stuff wasn't exactly news entirely, because the biography that came out by D.T. Max in 2012 had some of that stuff in it, right?
Well, it's also tricky with a guy who's continuously being rediscovered by a new generation. They're not always getting the update like, oh, and by the way, 5 years ago we found out he did some bad shit.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, our current contemporary moment around Me Too and our culture's tolerance for bullshit from toxic men is at an all-time low, which is great. And so now in retrospect, people are looking at Wallace's biography and certain details of it and being like, this guy maybe isn't as deserving as we once thought he was of that kind of, sainting or canonization or however you want to sort of put it.
But I mean,
And so like there's the big conversation around like death of the author, you know, like how much do we equate, you know, the human person with the text on the page, and where's the balance between the artist morality and all that kind of stuff. So it's been an interesting conversation to be a part of for the last few years or so.
See, I've heard people when I have pointed that out and like, oh, there, you've told me he's a bad guy. Are you happy now? Are you happy that you destroyed it? It's like, well, no, I don't even want him posthumously canceled. It's just, and I think the answer for a lot of these, particularly artists who are no longer with us, is not the end. The end answer isn't, for me personally, it's not that you can't enjoy this anymore because he was a bad guy. It's no, you need to look at this now from and not only in the context of the time it was written, but the entire book is about what a broken fucking person he is. You can't be a little shocked when, oh yeah, being broken might make you do bad things here and there.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's, just always have your gods, but kick them in the shins every now and again.
yeah, no kidding. And I mean, like the passage that we're talking about tonight has a lot of really cringy racist stuff in it. And I'm sure we'll get to that later, but like when you say it's a product of the time it was written, so 93 to 96 is when Wallace wrote this. Came out in 96. We can talk about whether some of the description of like the Chinese women when Randy Lenz is stalking them and their bags is from the perspective of Lenz's disgusting racist cranium and his worldview. Is that reflective of Wallace's view of Chinese people? Like, God, I certainly hope not. So there's a lot of nuance to the racial questions within this book, and they have come under a lot of critical scrutiny in the last few years, for sure. Like Wardeen B. Cry section of the book, that is a super problematic few pages of literature for sure, no matter when it was written.
I think part of it is not only that it's so problematic, but that particular section feels so unnecessary. Like I thought that at the moment, and now
it's just not good storytelling,
I'm 4/5 into the book that if that thing was not there, I would have never, it's not like you would have been like, this feels like it missed a beat, And I think part of it is also, and this is something that's been more, I understand the impulse because, again, in the vein of comedy, if you went back 10 years ago, it was perfectly okay. Not perfectly okay, but you had a lot of examples like Louis C.K., another canceled guy, like, let's take these slurs, but let's turn them around. And still, it was a time where you could like still use the stereotypes and the slurs to make a point. Whereas now we've evolved to the point where it's like, we don't even do that. It's just, okay, you had your fun with your F words and your N words, and we're going to put this in a locker. You can't play with it anymore. You can mention they're there, but you're not allowed to play with them anymore.
Yeah.
And it's probably the way it should be. But I don't know. Do you have any other questions for me there? Just because I'm curious what you had.
Yeah. Okay, so you say about a 4. That's cool. I'm curious to see. Like, I can't wait to hear what your final thoughts are on the book once you get to like 790 or 971 or whatever it is.
Oh, there's like some big stuff coming up that's gonna really pivot where I'm at.
I'm absolutely anti-spoiler as a rule. So I think this is a hard book to spoil. A lot of people sort of say like, it's a lot more about the character development than like big plot points. And I think the big plot points of this book are mainly there to serve the character development rather than the other way around. I'm curious, what do you think, like, what is your sense of who your audience is that listens to your show? Is it people who like, are people like, yes, I fucking hate that book too, let's just dunk on this book, I'm here for that? Or you mentioned I think before we started, some hate mail that you got when you first started, of the ultra fan folks who were like defensive to the death, and this is the hill they're gonna die on, like who do you feel is like who's listening to your show? What's your sense of that at this point?
You're right. Early on, I did get some very verbose, well-written hate mail, But
Yeah, and I joked that it was me that sent it.
yeah.
It
that was honestly my, like, the intro episode I had for the podcast was completely re-recorded because the first one got such a negative. Just I was, I was feeling froggy, and it was probably a little much, so I re-recorded it. I had no idea who this was going to be for. Honestly, I think the bulk of my audience are Infinite Jest fans, or I've actually had quite a few who are David Foster Wallace fans who think Infinite Jest is a little overrated.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that's not a majority. I wouldn't even say they were small enough to. They were even big enough to call them a minority. They were a sliver.
Yeah.
But my hope as we finish up the podcast in the coming weeks and move on to other things, I hope that these episodes stay up for somebody who's trying to get into the book. I almost feel like the worst sin is people not finishing the book.
Yeah.
Like, I hated that I never finished it. I hated that it was difficult enough for me to not finish. So that was why I came back to conquer it.
It's almost a punchline, isn't it? The person who owns Infinite Jest, but it's never read it.
Exactly. It's so crazy that this book is still in the zeitgeist right now, and it's in the zeitgeist still for two main reasons. Is number one, the fanboys are very fanboyish, and number two, so many people give up on this fucking book. So
I mean, it is a long obedience in the same direction to finish this book.
Yes,
for sure. Like I think the first time it took me like 3 months or something. I was reading every day. That's a long time to read one book, for sure. Yeah. I get that.
I would have probably put my head down and been like, all right, I'm getting through this. But doing it every week, and the fact that I have a pace dictated,
that's helpful.
Really helps, because if I'm not particularly liking the section, like, well, I only have 30 so pages, so who cares?
Yeah. That's a good chunk. Like for Infinite Winter, we were doing 75 pages at a time in a week. And I found that to be like a pretty rapid clip. And then I also had to like write a blog post about it,
See, that was what kept me to 30 pages. It was not only like knowing I would have people on who weren't massive readers, particularly early on. I was just trying to get comedians because I knew I could riff with them.
Yeah.
But I figured 30 pages is not too much to ask of somebody.
Yeah, it was reasonable. Totally.
Yeah. And it's also,
except for we hit that huge footnote, or that huge endnote about the call to the train. And I was like, oh man, I thought I could maybe get through these 30 pages without like a six page endnote.
Yeah. I saved that for the end. Like I actually completely ignored it in my notes. But the other thing was just the notes. Summarizing 30 pages is harder. Not harder. It's more labor intensive and time consuming than you might think.
Yeah. Do you get a sense from some of your audience that they're like reading along with you here at this kind of similar interval, and it's like a group read? Yeah. Yep. Oh, good. Cool. Well, I like that.
One of the ways I've been promoting the podcast is I have just been on Twitter, and I've been looking for those people saying like, well, it's COVID, I guess I should finally read this. And
there's been a lot of that, hasn't there?
Yep. And just dropping the link, like, read it with us.
Yeah. Cool.
It's I do think Begrudging Book Club is the number one descriptor.
That's a good that's I like that.
So speaking of,
it's got alliteration, it's got there's the pathos of what you're doing.
So hey, academia, writing, comedy, we're all people of words.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of comedy, are you a Tim Robinson fan? I know this is like way off topic, but I
have no idea who that is. I have no idea who that is, so I'm going to take a guess. Is he a European?
No, he's American, from Detroit.
Okay,
he's got a show on Netflix called I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson.
I know who the guy is. I didn't know the name.
Okay. Yeah. And he's got a show called Detroiters as well with Sam Richardson. It's like his wingman. And I just think, like, in terms of comedy for me right now in 2020, that's what's up. That's the funniest thing that I can think of that exists. I tell every person that I talk to about comedy, like, Tim Robinson. He was a staff writer for SNL apparently, and they never ran one of his skits because they were so bonkers. And then so Netflix just gave him a whole show, and he just did 6 episodes of all of his skits, and they're it's like they put you in a different stratosphere.
See, I think I watched the first episode, and I
Yeah,
unfortunately was just in a headspace where I couldn't give complete control to it. The only sketch I
yeah,
remember is it's the girls at the park or a restaurant, and they're taking
yeah. The
photos with each
restaurant.
other and being
Yeah,
passive aggressive, like one, yeah, one's like out here with these two dummies, and then of course there's the one girl like I'm
Sunday
out
fun day.
like out here with these two fatherless cunts. Like, whoa, what? What? We're being fake
Snarfing on
mean.
fish piss with these wet shows. Yeah, that's good. I like that dude.
All right. So you ready to get into our notes for this week?
Sure, let's get into the passage. Cool.
All right. Typically I will dot these with conversation points, and I didn't have a whole lot this week. So anytime you have something to say or something sounds interesting, tell me to shut my fucking yapper and we'll get to it.
All right.
714. Kate Gompert has a splitting headache and swelling eye as a red apparition fades before her. Poor Tony rushed between Gompert and Ruth Van Cleve, yanking both their purses. Cleve's snapped, but Gompert's did not, and she got yanked face first into a light post. She is currently being annoyed by a homeless man who said he witnessed the whole thing as Ruth Van Cleve chased poor Tony down the streets. So first thing, we get a rare thing in a chunk of Infinite Jest. We have a lot of like quick mini chapters here that like everything's just summed up and then we're immediately on to something else, which I'm seeing more as we go along. And the action, I mean, specifically right here, we have, again, a bunch of characters who have not interacted being pushed into the same zone at the same time.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, lots of time with poor Tony in the Armenian bathroom stall. How long ago was that?
That was actually...
That's quite a saga, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like that was like... It almost feels like that was like 400 pages ago, but
Okay.
but
it makes reference to that in this section, right? Like,
right, it seems like
chronologically,
we're not far away from it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when in the previous episode, Maddie Pemulus was watching out the restaurant window as poor Tony walked by, and this is him just having woken up from the seizure coma and going. Well, I think it was just a seizure, but yeah. So he's just out on the street, so he is still looking like death. As a matter of fact, they said a few times he is on that post-seizure feel-good high, which I guess is a thing people with seizures have.
Yeah, I don't know. Was Maddie Pemulus in the Unexamined Life when he sees poor Tony go by? The name of the bar?
That must have been it. I did
the
not.
Unexamined Life.
That's a hell of a name for a bar.
I do love the title of that. Very like the Socrates reference is pretty tremendous there. The unexamined life is not worth living. And that's a good place to drink by the sound of it, you know?
Sounds where is a better place to forget your problems than an unexamined life?
Yeah, exactly.
I miss bars so much. One of my favorite things to do used to be, and this just goes to show what a misanthrope I am. One of my favorite things to do would be just to stop in at a bar, a local bar in the middle of the day and just see like the local characters who like
the day drinking crowd. Yeah.
The day drinking crowd. Day drinkers have great stories.
Oh, I believe it. Do you ever just go into bars and like pull up a stool and write comedy? Like, do you just pull out a notebook and just kind of like let the hum of humanity around you sort of foster your comedic juice?
I actually not really. I tend to do my writing style. I still believe that the key to comedy is just the dumb thoughts that everybody has during a day and just having the wherewithal to pluck them out of the sky and write them down. Like, and then I take that note home and then I work on it from there. Like I was at a friend's house, like backyard social distance thing yesterday. And I
like they qualified that, like, I'm not an asshole, I'm wearing a mask. Like this is
there's a lot of assholes. Like a guy I know on Facebook was bragging today saying, "Hey, I got COVID and I'm fine. Just go out and get it. I'm living my life up." And like, dude, you're a fucking idiot. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that is not helpful, buddy.
Well, I'm going against him in a roast battle in 3 weeks, so I have plenty of things calling him a fucking super spreader.
Is this roast battle like on Zoom or something? How's this working these days?
No, it's gonna be. We still have like a lot of outdoor. So I don't know how it is where you guys are. We have a lot of breweries in our neck of the woods, and they all have like patioed outdoor seating. So we're
So you do
all
outdoor. Awesome.
we're all trying to do as best as we can before
Yeah.
everything shuts down again, which is probably going to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
What are you in New Jersey? What's your neighborhood right now?
I'm
Are you
in
in New York?
I'm in no, I'm in North Philadelphia.
Oh, you're in Philly. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
Oh, I went too far. There
Well, you're
was
from New Jersey, right?
I'm originally from South Jersey, but it's literally
Okay.
it's still the Philadelphia media market. I'm so close by.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah. But there were two parents at this party with like their infant, and they were talking about like, oh yeah, it's fun having a family member piss on you. And I got to mention like, oh no, my brother pissed on me like 4 years ago. Like, oh, is he younger? Like he's 30. He's a sleepwalker. He came out to me, and I hit on the notion that like, yeah, I'm sitting there watching TV in my mother's living room, and my brother walks out, and all I can see is the silhouette. I'm like, hey Ken, what's up? And he starts pissing on me. And like, Ken, what the fuck? And this wasn't even the comedy thing. The comedy thing is when I point out, like, and you know, sleepwalkers, how they're also indignant. He's like, fucking sorry, I guess. And I went and wrote
No remorse.
exactly. So I just went and wrote a whole thing on how sleepwalkers are indignant assholes. That just
Nice.
so yeah, that's where my
good.
dumb comedy from. I went a very long walk to answer that question. I'm sorry.
That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I like your point that we have some characters converging now, like Ruth Van Cleve, who doesn't. I don't think she gets a lot of airtime, but like Clonette Henderson gets some airtime, especially in the fight with the Canucks that you mentioned. And she's like kicking one of them in the head with her heel and saying like motherfucker every time and emphasizing the fu syllable. I always remember that, like, you know, going back to Wallace's, you know, maybe 8 times shallow sort of stereotypical representation of people of color. You know, like I watched a lot of like Compton movies when I was like in 10th grade. I was really into like rap culture and stuff, and you know, Boys in the Hood and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of like what that vibe felt like to me, you know, of how Wallace is capturing Clonette and her like kicking the Canuck in the head, which I think he dies, right? Like her spiked heel goes right through his eye.
Yeah, I think they were pretty explicit that they just
yeah, erased his map.
I do love that term, erased his map. I didn't like it at first. I feel like it was kind of saved for me when multiple characters were mentioned. Like, oh, this is kind of a euphemism in this world.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And it gets it gets different treatments. Like, you know, erased his own personal map, and the variations on it are just kind of riffed on throughout the book in ways that I found winsome on first read, and still do, I think. Yeah. Go Screw is another, you know, recurring.
I feel like you still hear Go Screw every now and again in the right neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know, if you park too close to the wrong house. Okay, so we have Randy Lenz is out on the streets, concerned he may be followed. He is walking behind 2 Asian women who are walking at a clip that suggests they each have several more legs than they do. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It paints a picture, I'll put it that way. His cocaine high is wearing off, and he's plagued by a frozen sinus sensation. He has been kicked out of Enid and is now walking the streets, hiding out, still disguised. He never sleeps or eats and remains in constant motion. He sneaks up behind the Asian women, both carrying large shopping bags. Lenz has heard and believes that Asians' religions forbid banking, so they tend to carry their entire personal wealth on their person at all times. He's hoping these two have mass currency in those shopping bags as he runs up behind them, gaining speed for a snatch. That's a new stereotype I never heard before. That
yeah, there's some pretty like dark stuff in this section. Hey, like he gets into like monkey language. Exclamatories have an explosive ricocheting sound to them. Orientoid is a word that gets that recurs a lot.
God, here. I didn't even take a note of that. You're right, I forgot that.
like it's a pretty gross passage, and so I was talking about this with my wife Rachel, who's also read this book, and she was actually a guest on our show at like right when she finished reading it, and we talked about like what's it like to read this book for the first time. Her and her best friend Amy both read it contiguously and talked about it. So we were talking about it tonight, and like I was throughout the week as I was reading it, I was texting, my co-host and some other friends who are part of this community, and like,
Mm.
do we think that, like, okay, Randy Lenz, I think, is the most morally reprehensible, morally bankrupt character in this novel.
Mm.
It's pretty obvious when he's like stalking the neighborhoods, putting cats in his
Yeah,
steel sack bags and smashing them, and all that stuff.
they're
Not to
there.
mention there, yeah, totally. Are you a video gamer, by the way? Have you played Last of Us 2?
I have not. Pretty much exclusively stick to retro games just to keep myself from falling down the void with it.
Yeah, there's a pretty early reference to Randy Lenz in that video game where someone kills a zombie and they go there. And it kind of recurs throughout. And I actually know someone who worked on the game. And so I messaged him right away on Facebook. I was like, hey, did you put this in the game? He's like, I did work on that scene. I can neither confirm nor deny that this was an Infinite Jest reference. And I was like, nice. He said his department head didn't want them putting in like explicit literary pop cultural references into the game or whatever. But I think you can get away with some for this book because it's pretty inside. But yeah, anyway, so the question, like, is this really racist categorization of these Chinese women? Is it from Lenz's psyche? But it is still written in third person omniscient here, right? So you're like, so it sounds like Wallace the narrator.
Here is what I've hit on, and we talked about this in a few episodes. This goes back to Gately using the N-word exclusively as a descriptor for black people. The style that we've hit on that Wallace does is what we've been calling a soft third person, by which I mean, obviously, the narrator and omniscient because he knows the thoughts and feelings of these people. Yeah. But the narrator is using language that is within the lexicon of the first person. So the first person, and I'd say it's actually very much in the theme of the book, the first person bleeds into and colors the third person narrative. That's been my personal interpretation, which that held up for me. I mean, the only thing is that I would be 100% satisfied with that explanation if not for the fact that Wallace feels the need to put various other ticks in completely unrelated characters that are like, there's no reason Don Gately should know what the word picayune is, and we'll use it several times in a chapter.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
Multiple people doing the "and but so but" thing, like,
right? Yeah.
That's kind of where it falls apart for me, because it's like, oh well, buddy, I'm trying to think you're doing this great thing here, but if that's what you're doing here, you're being really lazy right over here.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, I see. I mean, maybe there's kind of like a bleed effect where it's like there's consistent elements of narration that are authorial, and then there are some that are like in the brain voice of the given character that we're hanging in with. I mean, I think in this section we're getting kind of Randy Lenz's like disgusting racist worldview.
Yes.
In the way that he's, thinking about these people he's preying on. But having said that, like Rachel made the point that, maybe that's true, but it would be a better served argument if Wallace had better representation for people of color in his work, if he had more fully realized female characters throughout the body of his work, which I take that point, fairly. But I don't get the impression that Wallace was like a racist person, like I think he was, he's a well-educated, kind of blue blood East Coast type. That doesn't seem to me to be the person that Wallace was, but yeah, it's a fascinating element of this novel, isn't it?
Something he has that works against him, and it frustrates me as I hate to use the term edgy, as somebody who tries to do kind of edgy comedy a little bit. And I hate that word. It's just the only thing. I like making people hate me and then getting them back. That's all it is.
Okay. Yeah.
But there's a way to go about it. And to see him miss the opportunity, the number one thing he fucked up is like, you can explain that away, but then at the same time, you have the black man who almost assaults Erdity because he wants to hug him. and
Mm-hmm.
that character, who is one of the only characters that's characters of color that is given some time, and he looks just it's like he plucked him. It's like he plucked Doughboy out of Boys from the Hood and plopped him, which is not really the best representation.
Right. Yeah, totally.
To have that.
And then, yeah, totally. And that's weird too. Like you mentioned cultural, historical context earlier. This is like 1996. I mean, it's hard to hold someone in 96 to the same standards of like wokeness that we have in 2020, but that's not to say that characterizing people in this way wasn't bad. It's bad for sure, of course, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's a really complicated, nuanced conversation, and like I've been grappling with it for a while, and other people in Wallace scholarship community are like really wrestling with it. And
I wonder, like he lived to 2008. I'm surprised that he never got to really address it. I know he didn't make it to like the peak of where we are now, where everybody's like throwing beloved works at their authors and saying, explain yourself. But like he must have gotten a little bit of that leading up, because that wave was already coming up while he was still here.
Totally. It's so like, I would love to know what kinds of address Wallace would have given to this stuff if he was still living now, you know. Even too with like Me Too stuff, I'm really curious to see like how his life and approach would have shaken out. I mean, I guess maybe one of the best ways that we have to maybe possibly knowing is like, so his last novel was The Pale King, which was, you know, published posthumously, and he was working on it when he died. That book is about like primarily about white people in you know, doing insurance adjusting in Illinois.
I think that's another thing. This is another thing that works against him, is that as opposed to many other authors that we've seen, like, oh, well, they evolved at a certain point, so it's okay. He was extremely not prolific with his fiction writing. So it's not like you have later
3
stuff.
novels. Yeah.
It's not like, well, you see, he got around to it by The Pale King. It's just like, nah, it's just he has ... gone. So we only have so many examples of what he, you know, him putting together a more sympathetic, realistic character. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, his books take up quite a large portion of one of my bookshelves, like almost an entire shelf, you know, between all the short story collections and essay collections and stuff. So, I mean, his output was pretty radical for how young he was when he died.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I'm really curious to know what the last 12 years would have looked like for his output on some of these questions, for sure.
It's a shame, and it's one of the things that makes me more lax on him, because I mean, you can only hold a dead person so responsible. Yeah,
for sure. That's a tricky thing about it.
All right, let's keep pushing on. Here.
Press on.
Poor Tony knows the secret to running in high heels. Run on your toes. With so much forward momentum, your heels never come into play. Tony is out of breath running with 2 purses from Ruth Van Cleve, who he had not anticipated would pursue him so much. Tony counteracted Ruth's cries for help with similar cries of help, flummoxing and incapacitating bystanders on whom to assist. Tony knows he is close to the Antois brothers' shop and tries to out-juke Ruth, whom he is thinking of as the Thing, but to no use. He even sacrifices his beloved feather boa when Ruth gets a grip on it. Tony is ragged and breathing bad with bleeding feet, and Ruth Van Cleve is getting closer and closer and closer. Here we literally get like a physical, like we're jumping back and forth. We're seeing poor Tony getting closer, and we see Lenz see poor Tony, and then we're about to see the wheelchair assassins in the Antois shop. We don't even get to that in this chunk, but like we are on a collision course where some shit's about to go down.
Yeah, totally. Have you ever seen the movie Magnolia, the Paul Thomas Anderson film?
Yes, I have.
There's a lot of like similar stuff going on here, I think, right? Where like you get these disparate characters, there's all these storylines, and then after 3 hours, they're starting to slowly converge, and some of them begin to intertwine and overlap. And like Paul Thomas Anderson was a student of Wallace's in the 90s, quite briefly, I think. So you there's kind of a kindred
Okay.
like narrative situation happening, I think, between those two.
Is this book going to end with it raining frogs? Because I don't know if I can believe that right now.
I said before that I'm anti-spoiler, but I will say the answer is no to that.
Okay. Okay.
But one thing that's interesting is that Wallace wrote in a letter to Don DeLillo that if you see the movie Magnolia on the marquee, run in the opposite direction. It is like bad in a grad schoolish kind of way.
Mhm.
So Wallace, like, even though he was Anderson's teacher at one point, he was like very derisive about that film.
Oh, that sucks. See, you know what the irony is that despite not really liking what would be called pretentious books, I love the shit out of pretentious movies. Like, they are made for me.
That's funny. Okay.
I will watch Seventh Seal every single day and be just happy with that.
Okay. Huh, something about like visual depiction versus on the page. Just there's a pretension that doesn't exist on film that exists in a book or something for you.
I think I think in books there's just you can look at a film and you could like, oh, I missed that, I need to rewind. But I feel like just the way our brains are wired, I think you only naturally retain so much information that is taken in the form of reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I find particularly when they try to do long ass sentences with no period at the end. I've read psychological studies on how like your brain processes and like comparts information away, and that long sentences like that, at a certain point your brain is just like, when can this end so I can put a bow on this idea and remember it for later.
Oh my gosh, have you heard of a book called Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellman?
I can't say I have.
I think it came out last year and it was up for the Booker Prize. It didn't win, but I had a chance to read it this year. I read it kind of like right at the start of the big quarantine lockdown in March.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's 1,030 pages, give or take, 1,020. And it's from the perspective of a housewife in Ohio who bakes pies as a day job, and she has 4 kids. And most of the book, like the main action of the book, is 1 sentence long.
Jesus.
There are a few sections along the way that have like a short, page or two about a mountain lion and her cubs, and it's kind of, you get a little bit of that story punctuated along the way, but the rest of it is just 1 sentence, and each sort of clause begins with the fact that so when you say that, like, some people are like, wow, Wallace wrote like a 4-page sentence without any periods, and I feel like Lucy Ellman has like completely obliterated this record. Like,
on it.
Yeah, completely. Michael Jordan on like Magic Johnson driving to the hoop or something,
That is one of the things I love about the 21st century and the new information age, is it seems like these massive accomplishments are just getting destroyed quicker and quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember the first time on YouTube where I play guitar. I'm a pretty good guitarist, if I say so myself. And then a week on YouTube, and I have watched 30 12-year-olds that could smoke me in anything ever. And it's just like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to become a comedian and a podcaster instead, because 12-year-olds have me beat in the guitar department.
Yeah, new levels of humility in the 21st century for us. Hey?
Oh yeah. Okay,
yeah, that's crazy.
That's
yeah. So what's your take on Randy Lenz? Like, what do you make of this dude?
I think he's a real piece of shit, and I'm actually I'm not comfortable with when I was a boy, my dad ran around with a pretty unsavory crowd of like biker gang guys, and I'm actually a little disturbed at the familiarity I have with a lot of Lenz's behavior. Just that kind of, you get the image of like a fucking snake slinking down the sidewalk, and you just all you know is like, I want to stay away from wherever that's going
as far as possible. Like, conversely, how do you what is your sense of poor Tony Krause? Do you feel like a greater sense of empathy for poor Tony?
I'm still a little just
Jury's
bit.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like poor Tony is there to serve a purpose that I'm not aware of yet. In that, thousand little cogs all doing their work kind of
Mhm.
way. But yeah,
Gotcha.
I don't. Not a lot sticks out to me. I personally
Yeah.
didn't really care for much of the stuck in the toilet thing, just because for some reason when we get to like bodily function stuff in literature, my brain turns off. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I talked about this with somebody on a previous episode, that something about literature in novels, like
Mhm.
when they start talking about like farts and diarrhea, for me it's like I don't it's not even a grossness, it's just like a why.
Yeah. Have you spent any time with Wallace's brief interviews with hideous men
No, I
collection yet?
I am almost certainly going to do a series on that someday. I
Okay.
definitely need a break from Mr. Wallace for a bit after this,
I'm
so.
sure that's true for for most people after they finish this book. But there's a short story in that collection about a bathroom attendant at like a high, uh, like a really expensive restaurant where there's a bathroom attendant who like hands you the towel after you've washed your hands, and it's just him basically like recording the like sounds, the toilet sounds that he hears all day. Like it is so visceral and so
Mm.
disgusting, but it's also quite funny, and I in some ways feel a sense of endearment to it, even though it's like really repulsive.
I still think one of the most disgusting things I ever read was Joe Hill, who is Stephen King's son.
Okay.
I'm actually a big fan of his novels, but he has a collection of short stories,
Hmm.
and in one of them, he has a story of a guy who basically, just like a sex fiend in a hotel jacuzzi, uh, puts his anus against the suction thing,
Okay.
and I'll let you get your own descriptions than that, but it is vile.
Okay. Do we have like
Yeah.
internal organs being like siphoned out of
Oh
out
yeah.
of the body and things?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's pretty rugged.
And lurid descriptions of like where they are inside him at this moment and what direction they're going. Mm.
That's grisly. Yeah.
Ugh, God.
Yeah, that's a hard pass for me.
Yeah.
Um, I think in this section too, where we have poor Tony running away from Ruth, like he refers to her as the black creature several
Mm.
times, I think.
I actually
I
didn't pick
think
up.
this
I,
is
I didn't pick up on the black. I noted creature, but
creature is kind of recurring. I
uh-huh.
think this is maybe kind of like further evidence to that point we were talking about, that like this is like that character's brain voice, and
Mm-hmm.
that character's prejudices kind of seeping into the third person omniscient text or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We see it even too a little bit further on with Marat, and he's like his French, English as learning language syntax is seeping into his own thought English.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like he's not even saying it out loud, but he says something, like the smells were the under of an arm from the facial skin, not like an
Yeah.
armpit or an the under of an arm, which is such a like French Canadian syntax when
Yeah.
they're speaking English. So I think we see that's sort of
Coloring.
literary color, yeah, a lot through these like 30 pages that we read this week. Yeah.
All right. Gonna jump in here. So we have the AFR at the AFR has tracked the entertainment down to the Antitois Brothers store. It still took several days to find a copy. Fortier, and I believe this might be the first time we actually see Fortier on the scene and not just being discussed.
Yeah, that's probably right.
The leader of the USA cell made sure the search was thorough and clean. They went through every cartridge one at a time with a volunteer doing the viewing. They put closed signs up to ensure no intruders. Specifically, they are seeking a copy owned by Duplessis, the sniffy Canadian VIP Gately accidentally killed. It is hinted that they possibly traced it to Antitois via whoever assisted Gately in that burglary. Every copy they have found has been read-only, meaning it cannot be duplicated. Only a master can be duplicated, and that is what they're searching for. The belief is that, and I think this is the first time we really get the crystal, like, this is why they're doing this. The belief is that if Quebec can copy the entertainment and rain terror on the U.S., Canada will look so bad that they will have no choice but to forcibly secede Quebec to independence to save their own hide.
Right.
So yeah, I know it's commented on before where it's like, what exactly? Like, I
What's
thought
the
the
end game
whole
here?
exactly, and I think that's
Yeah.
the first time it's actually spelled out.
Mm.
A footnote informs us that Fortier intends to force Morat to view the entertainment, that he knows Morat is out for revenge, not for his ill wife, but for Morat's brothers who died in the train ritual that Fortier personally witnessed. Fortier had to contact their Southwest office, possibly Steeply. They believed that a relative of the filmmaker, an athlete, Oren, was responsible for giving the entertainment to Duplessis in the first place, and Steeply is stalking Oren in the hope of more and access to the master. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we get a lot spelled out very well there.
That's true. Hey.
Yeah.
So when I talked earlier about the plot, like not really mattering all that much, there's some like pretty plot heavy beats going on in this section. Hey.
Oh yeah. Well, now we have a connection between Oren and Duplessis, which I don't think has even been hinted at before.
Right. Yeah. Even when you said that just now, I'm like, I don't think I even picked that up reading it like this week. Yeah, and that Duplessis section early on in the book where his place gets burglared by Don Gately, and he's got the head cold. I think about this so often, man. Like Murray's like, please do not like gag my mouth, my nose. It is a brick of the snot. And I just think about what an awful way to die that would be. Like you can't even breathe through this, through your nasally congested.
Just a slow sniffly death.
Asphyxiation. Oh, it's so rough. So rough. Have you talked about the MacGuffin aspect of this on your show before?
We have not actually. Okay. I guess because we've seen, as opposed to I can't think of a lot of literary MacGuffins, and not that I haven't read them, I just don't have them on the top of my head. But if I think about them in movies, usually their usefulness is not really displayed that explicitly as we've seen with the entertainment.
Okay. Yeah. So the entertainment is more in the forefront as like a motivating force for a lot of the characters in this novel.
Right. I would still say it has most of the characteristics of a MacGuffin, aside from the fact that it's so tied into the theme of a lot of the rest of the book.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Americans being addicted to,
although
North Americans.
I had my comedian friend Rusty Wright on a few episodes where we did a Footnote episode and we talked about Big Red Sun.
Yes, I listened to some of that. Yeah.
So, but when I told him the main gist of Infinite Jest, that it was about this tape that's so entertaining it kills you, and I just love somebody who's not in on this, who hasn't like learned all the nuances, just going like, that's like bullshit sci-fi 101. What the fuck? Why do people like this? It's just like I like somebody just breaking it down like that every now and again.
Yeah, totally. My friend who's a Wallace scholar, his name's Bill Latanzi, he like made a film, like a documentary film about Infinite Jest. He hasn't been able to get it published or finished because of like the Wallace estate's wishes, which is true for a lot of projects that can't get off the ground actually. But he like traces this idea back to an episode of The Monkees, where there was a fatally addictive entertainment that characters couldn't stop watching. And he's got a whole section of his documentary on like that being kind of like one of the origin points of the entertainment in Infinite Jest.
I love that. I did.
That's kind of a funny connection. Yeah.
I did postulate with somebody on the show that the entire novel feels very 90s, specifically with the entertainment aspect, that I wonder if he hadn't written this a decade later with the explosion of the internet, if it wouldn't have been quite so much about entertainment as specifically information
glut.
Overwhelming. Yes, glut.
Yeah. Like the Neil Postman idea, kind of. Although Neil Postman wrote and was Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's like the 80s, I think, like 85 or something. Which is hilarious when you consider the context of the 1980s and like television and movies that you had to access through cable or go to the VHS or go to the movies, like, and the accessibility of media is just bananas now. Like, it's so ubiquitous.
It really is mind-blowing to the fact that you need to learn to be like your own dad now and be like, son, put that phone down for a little bit. You don't need go outside and look at the sun.
Yeah. You're living with like two selves inside of you who are constantly warring for dominance, you know.
Yeah.
Which dog are you going to feed? That kind of idea.
God. Okay, so we see Joelle for a brief minute here. In sobriety, life goes from not caring to obsessive caring swiftly. Joelle is now concerned about her teeth, which tend not to do well after smoking cocaine for years. She lays in bed and dreams of Gately administering to her teeth. She gets a kick thinking of his massive fingers, ungloved, probing her mouth. That they share the same concerns about her dental hygiene. That's what you want in a man. The fantasy turns ugly as she sees her unveiled face in the dental mirror, ravaged by cocaine use, and in her mouth she sees multiple rows of canines like a shark that go deep into her throat like a sarlacc pit. That's my note there, but that's what I pictured immediately.
I was like, yeah, I don't remember that description. What's a sarlacc pit? Is that from like Dune or something?
Oh, sarlacc pit is from Star Wars Return of the Jedi.
Okay,
cool. It's just a whole, but you're right in the Dune aspect in that it's in like a sandy world, and it's just like a row of teeth in the in the sand going down.
Gotcha. Yeah, cool.
Okay. Upon returning to Antitois after calling the Southwest, the men have found Duplessis's entertainment cartridge, labeled only with a yellow smiley face. 2 young volunteers die to confirm this, one of which was named Desjardins, which as a Philadelphia person, I still remember Desjardins very fondly from the Flyers.
Oh, yeah. Louis?
I don't remember his first name. I can never remember their first names. Like, I
was a child of the NHL in the 90s. Like, I watched NHL hockey a lot in the early 90s. And then I took a lot of years off from watching hockey until like 2011 again.
See, you know what? Getting in with some of the themes of the book, I would be a much bigger hockey fan, but the distribution model for hockey is very strange because you have the NFL where the games are on local broadcast, but then when it came to like baseball or basketball, most basketball or hockey, it was all on like the local Comcast sports station. But as somebody who's been on the streaming kick for like 6 years now, I just haven't had. You need to have cable to have that, and I just
so like NHL Center Ice, which is like I don't know, $150 a year or whatever it is. Yeah,
and that's always the thing when it comes to me in all sports. It's like I'm not a football fan. I'm an Eagles fan. I'm not a hockey fan. I'm a Flyers fan.
Right. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I don't like follow any teams except for the Vancouver Canucks. I don't really like care about what's happening in the playoffs except for what's happening with the Vancouver Canucks. Like, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Like, honestly, I was never like, I cheered on the Eagles when they played, but then after they won the Super Bowl, I was kind of like, okay, well, I guess I'm done for this lifetime.
My job here is finished.
Exactly. Well, especially like the Phillies won the World Series a few years ago from like the Tampa Bay Rays. So who gives a shit? Then they were up against the Yankees the next year and they lost. Like, okay, so we can't beat a real team. But that's why the Eagles thing was so cathartic for everyone, because not only did we finally win the Super Bowl, but we beat the fucking Patriots to do it.
Oh my gosh.
Like
the Patriots. Yeah.
High five through the Zoom screen. Fuck the Patriots.
Yeah, that is just a consistency that should not exist in sports. To make the playoffs or to make the Super Bowl like 8 out of 10 years, and win like most of them. Yeah. That's boring.
What's funny is
it's like 90s Bulls shit right there.
Yeah, it was a brief blip in the national scene, but it happened to happen during the Phillies thing. So in Philly, people still refer to Tom Brady as that loser who kisses his son on the mouth. Because there was a video that went viral a little bit before it, like getting ready for the game, and like his 13-year-old son, he just gives a big wet one on the mouth, and so that's still like we remember it very much.
Sure. Yeah, it's hard to forget something.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Visceral. Yeah.
So all they can't find the master, which Fortier more or less expected, giving the unique shape and sizing of the casing. There's no way the Antitois brothers wouldn't have tested it out. So he was pretty sure it wasn't there when he saw them just up and walking around. Right. But having recovered the read-only, now they knew the only option was to find the original, well within their grasp, by going through the Incandenza family.
Yes, yeah.
There's benefit that the author's family was mostly local. They had recruited 3 agents on the inside of Enfield: a student, presumably John Wayne, I'm just guessing.
Okay, yeah.
An instructor and an employee. So Putincourt seems to be the other. And
that seems like a fair guess. They
yeah.
teach like French Canadian history, right? For which is it Ted Schacht is writing the paper on the Jeu de Prochain Train, the Cult of the Last Train, which is Footnote.
I thought it was I thought it was Struck.
Oh, is it Jim Struck? Yeah, okay. I got those two confused.
I have that tucked away at the end, so we can get to that there.
Cool.
They are also aware of the last known location of the entertainment's star at a local radio station. They kidnapped an engineer who told them all he knew merely at the threat of torture. Moraith believed him, but still followed through on the torture just to be sure. Which they're nice enough to say the engineer lasted longer than the average USA interrogatee.
Right. Well, that's good.
Yeah. The poor radio engineer would become their first test subject of the entertainment. He'd be given a saw. This one confuses me, actually.
Oh, yeah. This is gross.
He'd be given a saw and told to cut off a finger every time he wanted the cartridge replayed. They need other test subjects as well, and members were now patrolling the neighborhood outside the shop for people not too drugged up. So we have a few things right there. We know that in the vicinity, we have Lenz, we have Poor Tony, we have Gompert, we have Cleve, just in the vicinity where they're looking for people to test this on.
Right, yeah. Some of them seem like likely candidates.
Yes, they do. One of the things that confuses me, though, as cool, honestly, in a horror movie kind of way, kind of cool, a saw, like, you know, I want to say it, yeah. But I would not have thought that they would be lucid enough to have any kind of, like, the way they've been shown. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The way they've been shown to be so comatose, it really didn't translate for me being like, all right, if you want to see it again, then here's this saw. Like, I would imagine them just like looking off all googly eyed.
Yeah, like the medical attaché that is the first person we see watching the film seems to have that kind of like totally checked out in another universe, you know, hypnotic state kind of situation. But yeah, I hadn't remembered this detail about the saw and the digits until rereading it just now. Which, funny thing about a book that's over 1,000 pages, you don't remember some of the finer details like 4 years later.
That's why you get to go back and reread it.
It actually is. So I hate to even suggest this to you, Jesse, at this point. Like, rereading this book is one of the more rewarding literary experiences of my life, I would say.
Really?
Because
I don't want to read it again.
The thought of reading it again probably sucks. I get it. But like all the like these tiny details that we're getting now, when you read from like page 1, you're starting to see all of this stuff in the early stuff of the book. And you're like, oh man, I can just identify and you can just puzzle piece it together in a way that you certainly could not. You didn't have the tools for the first time you read it. So it's just like, I'm put that on the burner for maybe 10 years down the line, whatever, 20 even. Rereading it has a lot of people I know think that it is a fun, cool experience because you get way, way, way more out of the book on the second pass.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it someday. I'll do it when I'm out of ideas and I need to come back.
I hate Infinite Jest again.
Redux.
The podcast. Yeah.
All right. Jumping back into it, we see Lenz. Lenz was right. The bags were heavy and the women were weightless. He snatched their bags and ran past. He heard a loud crash nearby and saw Poor Tony and Ruth Van Cleve. Lenz gets far enough away to slow to a walk. He notices 2 trash truck guys smoking crack and walks past, ignoring them, looking for a remote yet well-lit enough place to sort through the bags and see what he has. So that's just a little beat there. I find the next section more interesting, enough so that I wrote it in all caps. Remy Marat is at Enid, which is kind of jarring because we have only seen him on the steps of Tucson watching the city burn this whole time, and suddenly he is right there with all our obviously a little late to the game, as we just saw Steepley show up at Enfield very recently before this. So,
And before we dive into that, I just want to like the sentence about the Lenz section there. He's going through the alley and there's the garbage truck, how he whispers to himself, Jesus, what a lot of fucked up ass eating fucking losers. And that's how the section ends. And you're like, Randy Lenz, like, that's a bit hypocritical, don't you think, buddy? Like, that's more or less how most people would describe you. That gives us kind of a window into his psyche that is somewhat illuminating, maybe.
Mr. Randy Lenz, if you ask me, I think the rehab you need is in the mirror. Okay, just
Michael Jackson's "Man in the Mirror" comes on, like, not to be too heavy-handed or anything.
Strangling the cats in the mirror. There. I don't know why I always remember it as there, but anyway, that's besides the point.
But yes, Marat is at the Ennett Recovery House in his wheelchair.
Not at all what I was expecting, but I'm excited.
That's a deep dive, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
So the AFR research is getting very personal and up close to like our primary protagonist of the book now. It feels like the walls are closing in a little bit, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. So we have him. He's trying to get into Ennett. He's listening to someone talk about a cult they were in where they would burn currency, which a neat one. The one detail I like that is the leader, known as the One, drove a Rolls Royce, but only drove it in that he ever kept it in neutral while his believers pushed it around.
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
Yeah, I like that. And like the other cult leader who made the people crawl around, slither on their bellies like snakes. To embrace our snake nature, it was cleansing. Serious slithering. They took wire and bound our arms and legs. At least your wire wasn't barbed.
God.
Yeah, that's quite a good exchange.
I do love the constant pithy one-upsmanship of all these AA groups. Like one of the funniest lines to me in the whole book is, and it's not even a concise line, is after the woman who talks about having the baby that was stillborn and having the umbilical cord, that whole gross story. And then he just drops at the end, like, the crowd really ID'd. Of course, more than half of them had worse lives than this. And like, just flippantly dropped that in there. Such a delicious little touch.
That's good. That is one of the more haunting scenes from this book, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's so great.
So we have Marat is wearing a veil. Apparently, this is the interview process to enter Ennett, and Marat has chosen to present as another veiled person, presumably to be accepted as someone to ID with Joelle. Several people approach Marat as he sits, but only to insist that he pet the dogs, being a tip to Pat Montesian. Marat is one of the only people not smoking. To whoever approached, he repeats the lines he and Fortier devised. Good night. I am addicted and deformed, seeking treatment for addiction, desperately. One smoking man glares at Marat. Marat is prepared to die for any reason in his mission, which left him free to choose among emotions. Americans did not appreciate this situation, he found. Marat enjoyed the veil's freedom to stare at whomever he wished without notice, and the smoke in the room made him feel sick. So we have the guy gets up, approaches Marat, recording every detail of the man. He has Levi 501s, a needle to the top of his ear. Nice little sentence. Wore motorcycle boots, but the variety worn by people who did not own motorcycles. Man leans in and asks Marat if he is real. Says most people in the room aren't real, but metal. Marat replies, I am Swiss. One of his other predestined responses. The man continues that these people walk around and make you think they're alive. So we actually discussed this in last week's episode with Jeff Anderson, that this has been said multiple times in the zeitgeist of the thing, but also in real, like Vonnegut and Breakfast of Champions, everybody else is robots. Current NPC theory. Are you aware of NPC theory?
I've never heard it phrased in that way. I know what an NPC is because I play video games.
It's really a dumb thing that like kids on the internet made up.
It just sounds like solipsism to me, which is a word that kind of recurs in this book, right? Like,
true.
You know, like my mind is the arbiter of truth, and I, project a universe, and everything else exists, for my engagement in some way. I guess it's kind of a similar idea.
Yeah, it's somehow dumber than that because it's more selective. because it's a lot of kids on the internet that literally they start from a place of like, well, there's a lot of people in the world, but only so many souls to go around. So probably a lot of people are just like NPCs, like there's nobody actually in there, which is a very solipsist type thing to think. Only they've managed to narrow it down to like, I'm sure there's plenty of other people, but the people I disagree with, they're probably not real. Which yeah.
I mean, I think Wallace makes a pretty good argument against that. Like, he gives flesh and voice to a lot of different psyches here in this novel and elsewhere too. Like, and I think, like, if you look at the wider, I don't know how much you've spent with Wallace's interviews that he's given, which he gave quite a few in his time, but like he's seems like he's a pretty empathic person, and like, you know, wants to give people imaginative access to other selves.
Oh yeah, no,
in his fiction, you know, like,
and I think there's a reason he's put this man who's like leering over Marat. I think there's a very important reason he's putting it in the mind of this person. Like, this doesn't seem like anybody we're supposed to think like, that guy knows what's up. Like, he just
yeah. This is not a credible narrator.
Exactly. And I even like how he describes it, that these people have a micro thin layer of skin, the rest machinery and RAM and hard drive, and says that if you can get close, you can hear the mechanical whir within them giving them away.
Yeah.
To which Marat responds blankly, I am Swiss, desperately seeking medical treatment. I love Marat in this scene.
Me too.
I imagine Marat as a little bit like William H. Macy's character in Fargo, as like this guy who really thinks he has it figured out, but is like kind of dumb still.
The car salesman,
yeah. Like he's really kind of stuck in this worldview that tells him he knows everything, but he doesn't really think outside of that at all.
Right. Yeah. That's a good comparison, I think.
And also, I like these little bits where we see not necessarily incompetence, but I like seeing like these big bad assassins and just like, you know, like, oh, okay, we kind of fucked that one up.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me about the scene is like, we were talking about, you know, visceral like toilet stuff in literature earlier. And the way that this scene is described with the cigarette smoke and like all the disgusting conversations that are happening in this room, and like the one person is like crab walking through the room, and then some guys are jumping over him. Like, it's just there's a lot of like bathos in this, almost like a Heimer's Bosch painting, or like,
ooh, I could see that.
Like a Bruegel painting or something, you know, like, and I just felt like actually almost nauseated reading this, the way that Marat is responding to like the cigarette smoke. It's like, it's such a visceral passage. And I think that literarily that's pretty amazing, to make your reader almost feel sick while they're reading.
Agreed. Well, as somebody who, I mean, you've seen, I've been vaping this entire time.
Right,
but
yeah.
As somebody who is like an ex-smoker, I am actually, that's where like most of my empathizing with the addiction stuff happens in this, because I always thought like, I'm probably still going to be a guy who needs to smoke every now and again. And like the shock of how like disgusting I find the entire thing now on a sensory level is so, it would have been impossible to predict from the headspace I was in. So I have really no issue like just hearing that much smoke in a room, just like, oh, that just feels
like gray blue as like the color to describe like what the air looks like, you know, like, and even like in the earlier AA passages of this book where like everyone's just on gaspers the entire AA meeting, and then just the dank like church basement coffee out of styrofoam cups. Like, it's a grim scene for sure.
It's pretty accurate to AA too. Like, it's weird that like the drug that is most likely to kill you is the one thing you're allowed to have whenever you want during recovery.
There's a weird irony to that, isn't there? And Wallace himself like infiltrated a lot of AA meetings, like as a way to kind of research this book. And some people that knew him were like, yeah, I kind of got the sense that this dude was just here for material, you know. But like, Wallace later was actually also like a card-carrying AA member himself too. So like, his own struggles with addiction, which didn't really come out until after his death. And in the biography.
That is something I did not know, that that wasn't really public knowledge until much later.
Yeah, I think his personal life was he was a pretty private person during his lifetime. And a lot of the stuff we know about his life and stuff that went down came out, 4 years later with DT Max's biography,
right,
and in other places too. So
I gotcha. Okay.
But him having depression was not a thing that was public knowledge until after his death.
See, that is so interesting to me, because it is so it's like the
first in this book.
Can you imagine that though? Being a private person, the thing you try to keep hidden from the world, and you're gone, and now it's like one of the first things people know about you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, anytime someone brings up Wallace, it's like, oh yeah, he took his own life. Yeah. That's like the first thing that people know about him. He wrote Infinite Jest and he committed suicide. Like that's just what it happens. It's like I had some people in my family get upset when they found out I had some material talking about my dad and his like hell-raising ways, and my response to them was like, guys, if he really cared about his legacy, he probably should have lived a little longer and changed, but he's dead, so I'm sorry, he's not going to be offended. So sorry, just it's out there. You want to control your legacy, just live forever. That's your only shot. Yeah, no problem there.
So the man keeps harassing Marat. Marat responds, "The Swiss, we are a quiet people," after the man tells him he makes no hard drive sounds. All the projection. Marat departs slowly to respond to his call after somebody calls for a physically challenged person with an unpronounceable name. Yeah. We can just jump into the next thing. Joelle used to enjoy getting high and cleaning. Now she merely likes cleaning. A common form of meditation for addicts too new in recovery to stand still. Started with Oren. She started cleaning whenever things were rough. The place together they had was provided nearly free by Jim, who said nothing during their first meetings. Oren had to reassure her this didn't mean he disapproved, but was merely so disinterested in people it would never occur to him to disapprove. Joelle was always creeped out by the weird family nicknames himself and the Mad Stork. Oren had introduced her to Jim's films, at that point so obscure that even local film students hadn't heard of him. By the end, she'd be closer to Jim than Oren ever was, which led to plenty of fights and late-night cleanings. She'd barely thought of the Incandenzas for years, but something about Gateland made them bubble up in her conscience. They were the second saddest family she'd ever seen. Oren complained often his lack of relationship with his father, which he was aware of was rather common. Joelle had the same-sex parent issue, never getting along with her mother at all. Oren seemed more centered to his mother. His father was just too removed. Jim's face the fifth wall in any room. Great phrase right there. The man was hidden. The only person he revealed himself to was Avril, who the entire family did. Oren said his younger brother was a hopeless retard. He found it odd neither of his brothers were exceptionally tall considering the height of the parents. Mario was the size of a fire hydrant. Oren was envious of him. Having to split the mom's love once he was born, that he once nearly killed Mario in his crib. So a lot to take in there. Just taking a break of that for a second. Actually, you know what? I'm going to keep steamrolling because I think it's better to talk about this whole, because we understand a lot about the Incandenza family dynamic here. Yeah. Joelle theorized that Avril's pathological love made Jim seem all the more cold and uncaring and made Oren all the more dependent on Avril. Joelle says Oren was nothing like her personal daddy, who was so involved he rarely left her room and pathetically followed her around the house like a puppy, ignoring his wife. Oren was the one who encouraged Jim to use Joelle in his films. Joelle was against it, having the brainy girl's discomfort about her looks. Also their effect on others, which her father had warned her of, in the phrase, "the sweetest syrup attracts the nastiest flies." She also wanted to make films herself, not be in front of the camera. She was grossed out by the obviousness that Oren thought he could get closer to his father through her, and she didn't really want to connect to the father that so hurt the man she loved. Joelle found his films amateurish, beautiful visually, but hollow and empty. She'd considered parodists inferior, people with judgments and criticism, but nothing to say. Coming at me right there, sounds like, but okay. Though Jim started to show brief, small flashes of improvement, intentionally ignoring what he was already good at and taking risks to improve his weaknesses. Oren was only the second boy to ever approach Joelle. Sorry this is long. I just want to get through this.
Oh, you're fine.
The first was a piss-drunk high school football lineman that approached her by nearly vomiting on her. He revealed the entire team had crushes on her, but she was just too pretty and intimidating. He'd had to liquor himself up to get any confidence to approach. Until that point, she thought it was her dad's weirdness that kept the dates away. This led to a love of film. She was so unentranced with her own point of view, she liked seeing the world from other people's lenses. The first proposal meeting had been at a seafood joint. Joelle arrived sober with no makeup, hair, and a sloppy knot. Jim had thought Joelle too conventionally pretty for his unconventional work. They ended up embarrassed for Oren, who kept blathering so long none of them talked. Jim told her later that he just didn't know how to speak with either of his undamaged sons without Avril's presence and meditation. Oren wouldn't shut up, and Hal was excruciatingly silent. Said he only got on with Mario because he didn't learn to talk till he was 6, so they had plenty of opportunity to be comfortable in mutual silence. Oren wept in the cab from the dinner. He had no idea what his father thought of him quitting tennis, about finding something he was finally great at. Joelle met the whole clan at Thanksgiving, and something about Avril made her uncomfortable, though she went out of her way to be sure to include Joelle, asking every fourth question to her. She noticed a spotless dog dish under the table, yet there was no dog to speak of. Jim refilled his drink numerous times. He was so tall that when he rose to refill his tumbler, he seemed to rise forever. Joelle had the queerest, indefensible feeling that Avril wished her harm. The family mainly talked to themselves, Jim about the film industry, Hal spouting random facts. Hal's 2 tennis friends passed out dental stimulators. Hal blathered so much Joelle wanted to slap him. Oren rambled about Carl Sagan. Joelle, nobody looked directly at Jim besides her. Avril encouraged Jim to use Joelle in his films. Mario fell out of his chair, which everyone found funny. Not once in front of Oren did anyone mention tennis. At some point, Jim got up to freshen his drink and never returned. Great little detail. Avril asked everyone to hold hands, and the dinner ended with an explosion of goodwill as Hal and friends begged for Kahlua. Mario flapped at them in imitation, and Avril showed mock horror when Oren brought out a cigar that he never lit. Joelle was overwhelmed after. Avril had been nothing but nice to her, but Joelle felt in her gut that Avril would have sliced her to ribbons without batting an eye and unnoticed by her loved ones. When they got home, Joelle's face hurt from the hours-long put-on smile, and it was the first time she intentionally did cocaine to avoid sleeping. At 4 a.m., she was cleaning out the back of the refrigerator when she heard Oren call out in a nightmare, another great line, call out in a nightmare that by all rights should have been hers. Whew, a lot there.
Yeah, that's quite a scene at the dinner table, the Incandenza home. I love the detail that Avril has them join hands secularly.
Mm-hmm.
There are these like punctuated points in the narrative that are just really well wrought. I found in this passage particularly.
Oh yeah, just the right word at just the right time is and secularly, I think, is the word that does that there.
Yeah.
It's also great to see the strangeness of the family through somebody else's eyes.
Totally.
Because obviously nobody within the family can be a non-biased observer.
Yeah, totally. I like that there's like other tennis kids there too from the academy, but they're never named.
Yeah, that was interesting.
So I'm like, is it Pemulus? Is Michael Pemulus at this dinner? Like, is the darkness? Is Orthostice there? I don't know. Like,
see, I actually get a little bit confused at what exact, like, how old everybody is at the table right here at this point. Because I don't
Hal 11. I think Hal's 10 or 11. It's mentioned.
Okay,
so it must have been quite a. So what is Hal in the year of the dependent adult underground? Is he 17? I think. I
want to say he's 16. Shit, you might be right, because I think the very beginning of the book they say he's like 18 or 19 when he's
and that's Year of Glad.
Yeah, that's Year of Glad. Huh.
Okay, so if he's 17 in the main action in YDAU, and he's 11 in this scene.
Okay, so that's a few years back. I just realized I had no idea.
Then it's like well before Year of the Whopper. I'm looking at page 223 right now, which is like the Rosetta Stone of the years.
Yes.
That lovely moment where you're like, oh, I can start to piece the story together now. Also the detail too that himself's glass of bourbon has methane shimmer coming out of it, like the air above it is like
it's so alcoholic. It's just
it's just a tumbler full of bourbon. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very, very interesting. We get into more the detail of how the love worked, which pretty much I love the idea of James and Candenza as like, and I feel like this is part of like the character where a lot of the people who love the book, it kind of disappears up his own ass. Like, oh,
Hmm.
I also know what it's like to be such a genius that nobody understands me and I don't know how to interact with them. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, guys, you're missing the part where he ruined his sons and nobody fucking liked him personally. Like,
Yeah, totally.
mhm.
And of course, like his whole impetus for making the film Infinite Jest was so that he and Hal could like converse together, right?
Right. God.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Okay. Yeah, let's just truck ahead. I feel like you can't say any more of it than the section it does says. It kind of lays everything out there.
Yeah, it's pretty literal stuff, isn't it? Like you get a
Mhm.
sense that like, okay, everyone's entirely dependent on the mother figure, on
Mhm.
Avril. She's like the nucleus of this family. Um, I mean, Mario gets kind of like a bad shake in this passage. What is your
Yeah.
sense? What is your sense of Mario? I'm curious to know.
I love Mario.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. I think
Me
he's
too.
a great
I'm
little
team
guy.
Mario all the way.
I like how it seems like his one negative trait is like he gets kind of grumpy when Madame Psychosis goes off the air. And that's just his one. I just imagine him like a little bundle of like just yeah, like like oh god, like you ever see a pug when it gets angry and it's struggling to breathe because pugs should not be. It's
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
like that. I just imagine it as just a little angry guy, like meh, just really pissed off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, he obviously cares for everybody and he wants to be involved. It's a little sad hearing how little, but then again, that seems to follow with the Incandenza family. You're either getting everything or nothing, positive or negative, nothing in between. And
Yeah.
Hal loves Mario so much that Orin
Yeah.
to refer to him as a retard the size of a fire hydrant.
Yeah. Orin's a dick for sure. Like
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
very few redeeming moments for Orin, I think, in this novel. Um, yeah, I'm a huge Mario fan, and people I know who like this book are like, I would say pretty polarized on this question. Like people think Mario is just like, yeah, whatever, what a lame character. Like he's just so earnest and he's so pure and
Mm-hmm.
basically holy. But I think Mario is like maybe the heart of this novel in some ways. Um,
Yeah, I'd say
he's good.
as far as the irony versus sincerity thing, which I know people try to say, well, that's what the book's about. Like, I think a little bit of the book is about that, and almost
Yeah, that's fair.
all of it's centered on Mario. And in that context, I like it. It's fine. I don't know how well it would stand up to scrutiny. It's also a little tricky when like everybody it's not like, oh, people have shades of this and shades of that. It's more like everybody's bad and Mario's just like the one moral person
Mhm.
in it. So it's kind of hard to really balance that out when like it's only really coming from one I don't know. I'm curious how somebody would do like how they have the knock together of like chaotic evil versus systematic evil and chaotic good versus systematic good. Have you ever
Is
seen
this
that character chart?
like from Dungeons and Dragons, like how you
Oh,
describe characters in D&D?
no, this is something it might have emerged from a screenwriting class, but
Okay.
it's like a Brady Bunch style, like
Yeah. I've
nine
seen
thing.
the meme. Yeah, totally.
Mhm.
I always
And
thought that came from D&D. I could be wrong though.
it could be, it really could be. But yeah, I just know they have those several axes between chaotic and
Right.
ruleful something. I don't know, but yeah, but it seems like only one chunk of that would be just him as just like the one lawful. It's not ruleful, it's
Oh,
lawful
lawful
good.
good. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah, that's
everybody
Mario.
else is just clustered far on the other. Like they're just bad.
Yeah, Lenz is like chaotic evil as far
Yes,
as you can go.
yes, he is. All right, you ready to get into this footnote?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, actually, before we get into that, I didn't do any thoughts on it, but you and I talked about it. How I keep comparing David Foster Wallace to metal bands.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, and you said you had a good one that you thought. I think you said Dillinger Escape Plan.
I did. Yeah, this was in our email exchange, I think. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like super mathy, technical. A lot of a lot of like rapid changes, abrupt changes, and like calculating infinity is kind of the embodiment of that. Maybe.
Yeah.
There's some pretty mathy sections of this novel too, right?
Yeah, no, it's, you know what? This goes back to why I compare him to Prague, where I feel like a lot of it, particularly a lot of like that, when you talked about the lady who, I shouldn't refer to her as just the lady, the author who did the giant novel in one sentence.
Oh yeah, Lucy Ellman.
Yeah, where it's kind of like, that might be really, that's not for the layman. That's for people who really appreciate and are going to go like, how the fuck did they pull this off?
Yeah,
and I feel
she's
like
Lucy Ellman's like Godspeed You Black Emperor.
Okay.
A super long, slow burn, single sentence crescendo at the end after 25 minutes. Not quite metal, but like anarchist French Canadian proto punk.
There you go.
However you want to describe post rock.
If you, the listener, are not familiar with Dillinger's Escape Plan, if you want like the tiniest idea of what they sound like without getting too crazy, listen to the song One of Us is the Killer. If you want to jump right in the fucking deep end and hear what we're talking about, go listen to Sugar Coated Sour, or
oh yeah, that's good.
Is that the first one off of Calculating Infinity, or is it 43% Burnt?
Oh, I can't remember the track listing, but those both are on that album. I'm quite sure.
Just go listen to the Calculating Infinity album. Get back into albums. Singles sweet. Are bad. Yeah.
Oh yeah, albums for life.
Hell yeah. All right. Footnote 304. Struck is writing a paper for Putencourt's class on Canadian unpleasantness. He's reading scholarly articles about a massive feral infants and wheelchair assassins, the AFR. The language is so technical, it's a rare case of reverse plagiarism, requiring so much translation for the layman to understand. The giant feral infants grow but never develop, leaving massive droppings. The wheelchair assassins fight ONAN, seeking only Quebec independence, by assassinating politicians and occasionally using large mirrors to drive USA motorists to death by confusion.
Oh man, that's such a rich detail here.
It's pretty cool. I've seen I've had him on the show, Infinite Jensen, the guy who does sketches.
Oh yeah, David.
Yeah,
he's great.
I love where he has that portrayed, that you have the two wheelchair guys with the giant mirror holding up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's done. I'm part of the David Foster Wallace Society. Like, I'm a board member on it, just a general board member. And he did the cover of our very first issue that we released a couple of years ago, with like Wallace in a taxi cab, like hailing to the library. And step on it.
But he is the only person to do this podcast who never turned the video on, which I appreciate, because there's something mysterious about the man.
Totally, that's
and
a mystique.
I want that veil up. I want to know that magic.
Totally. I dig it.
Yeah, the giant ferals grow but never develop, leave massive droppings. I went back a little bit. The wheelchair assassins reportedly arrive all at once out of nowhere. Their squeaky wheelchairs have led to the euphemism "to hear the squeak," the last thing someone hears before a sudden terrible execution. The wheelchair assassins, AFR, are essentially cultists. They are all survivors of Le Jeu du Prochain Train, the next train game, a savage nihilistic metal test. Originated in the nickel and zinc miners of southwest Quebec in the decade before Reconfiguration. A Russian roulette-ish train jumping. Precisely 216 boys, never more or less, starting groups of 6 at railway intersections. The goal is simple. It's chicken. The goal is to be the last of the 6 boys in your group to flee the oncoming train. The train is not an opponent. The only opponents are the other 5 players in your group. It's not just about your own courage, but your own willingness to force your fellow players into harm's way. The true champions know the other 5 are not their opponents, but their own will, holding till the last possible second. They close their eyes and trust the rail's vibrations to guide them. The first to jump up walks home alone, ashamed. They are still less ashamed than those who refuse to jump at all, which is simply not permissible. So, I've mentioned a few times.
Happened.
What was that?
Except for the one time that it happened, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
then that kid got drowned. It's so dark.
It's funny. I've told people that I'm really punishing myself literally right now because I'm reading Infinite Jest, and my off the clock, like just fun reading, is the Brothers Karamazov. So
that's brutal, man.
I'm a masochist.
Masochist. Yeah. I mean, that's a great book. I think actually, the Brothers Karamazov deeply informs Infinite Jest.
That is, so people have already told me that before, and I've heard some of
Yeah.
it. Just by coincidence, this week I happened to reach a part in the book where they talk about one of the schoolboys laying down on the tracks and laying there as the train passes over him to prove his mettle, which is seems like this comes directly from the. He keeps his legs, at least where I'm at in the book. No spoilers, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just love the serendipity that I just happened to find that both on the same week.
Wow, yeah. There's a Canadian scholar named Timothy Jacobs who wrote I think his master's thesis on, part of it is on Brothers Karamazov and Infinite Jest, and I think it's titled The Brothers Incandenza.
Okay.
And his argument is that, like, there's the obvious Hamlet kind of overarching story going on here in Infinite Jest, but Jacob's argument is that more so this book is indebted to Brothers Karamazov, and it more intensely mirrors the storyline of that book and the character development of that book than Hamlet does, for example. It's a really good, there's a short article in like an old Texas University Press publication. Got it on my shelf.
See, I've said a few times that I'm really, more so than finishing the book, way more than rereading it, which I don't want to do.
Sure, that's fair.
I tend to watch like a lot of film analysis videos and read a lot of articles on stuff like that. I really can't wait to dive into some of those analyses, particularly as they pertain to other media, because I've heard the connection of Brother Karamazov, aside from like the three brothers and like their obvious correlation between each other.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder, like, is there a Smerdyakov hiding out somewhere
right,
that I didn't notice? Is Pemulus Smerdyakov? That would be neat.
That would be. Another great book for you to check out after you finish reading The Brothers Karamazov is The Brothers K by David James Duncan. Have you ever heard of this?
It's ringing a bell, but I'm not getting any details in my brain.
It's like, I think it came out in the mid 80s. Okay. And it's about four brothers who grew up in Washington State in like the 1950s, 60s, 70s. One of my favorite books of all time, but it like obviously tips its hat to Dostoevsky in the title, and like has some pretty sweet similarities throughout.
Okay.
It's a good one to check out when you're done that.
I will have to look up The Brothers K then. Nice.
Yeah. It's
all
wonderful.
Right. I think we can finish up in this last chunk here.
Cool.
If you get hit full on, the body tends to be smeared red across 100 yards. More likely, the last-minute leapers are cleaved in two, losing their legs either promptly or later at the hospital. Struck struggles to come up with a way to plagiarize this. Hal and others have noticed that plagiarists often struggle harder to plagiarize than to formulate their own thoughts, which would take way less effort.
That's such a great section.
Yeah, it is. The entire train ordeal is traditionally performed in total silence. If a boy is struck, the last person to dodge is the winner. The struck boys often fill the role of audience for future rounds. It is not rare for several finalists all to be struck. Though it is known the legless survivors form the basis of the wheelchair assassins, it's not entirely known what the transitive property is that led one to the other. There's no overarching philosophy to connect the two. It is debated amongst scholars. There was also to consider the cult of the endless kiss. Boys and girls who'd partner and kiss, one exhaling into the other inhaling person and vice versa until they gave up or passed out, which is, of course, brought up several times throughout the book in different things. I think Oren specifically said that to describe his mother's overwhelming love and closeness. For one.
Saucy.
Yeah. But yeah,
it's such a hilarious parody of academia, this footnote. And like the great irony, is that Wallace is writing like a pretty academic novel here, I would say. But he's totally taking the piss out of the absurdities of academia in talking about this class and this paper and the ways that Struck is trying to like, what is the way that Hal phrases it? Whether it's dishonesty or kind of kleptomaniacal thrill seeking or what, Hal hasn't developed much of any sort of take about why people painstakingly plagiarize. It's a rad takedown. I love it.
Oh yeah, no, that's just the idea of just reverse plagiarism is it's very specific, but it's all very true to life. And again, the plagiarist, like, you could have just made up your own. There is there is a certain thing to plagiarism that I do think is just a lack of confidence in one's own ability to put something together.
Yeah, totally. Cognitive acuity or whatever. Like, yeah.
Yeah. You have anything else to say about that section?
I mean, it's really hard to wrap your head around how 216 French Canadian boys could organize something like this and pull it off without like authorities showing up and shutting it down. And like,
this
trains just keep coming. Like, I have a lot of questions about the like logistics of this.
This is something I actually kind of pictured as it's actually phrased pretty well in the movie Dazed and Confused, where they talk about like the hazing rituals and as the people are discussing it, they're saying it's like, yeah, and it's almost like the town has endorsed this, or at least is not actively discouraging it. Like, I'm almost picturing like kind of the upper class, like it's something like the upperclassmen have always brought in the younger people. There's like a tacit complicity in the people. Like, people are aware this is happening and they just kind of accept it.
Because I mean, quite a few mentions that this is like a really poor region, like the Papineau region is,
right?
And so like maybe there's just no like funding for agencies that could intervene in something like this.
Yeah, you gotta get your rocks off somehow. But also the fact that it's a poor region, the fact that it's a rural region, and yet the sheer amount of competitors is so high, it doesn't seem to really square with the rural thing unless there is like this underground network web of like the community not only allows but kind of encourages this especially as a rite of passage thing. Yeah.
And then that makes you think, well, maybe there are ties to like the AFR that go beyond what's being suggested here. So there's no philosophical connection that we know of between this cult of the last train and the AFR, but like maybe there is.
I don't know. I wonder, maybe there's some shame in being the loser, and this is like the redemption.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Well, it was a great 30 pages to revisit after, quite a long time away. It's nice to dig back into this book a little bit again. So thanks for bringing me into it, Jesse. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Thank you for coming on. This was a lot of fun getting into it. I'm looking forward, once I'm done, to actually go back and listen to your podcast, knowing everything.
Oh yeah, cool. We try to be like relatively non-spoilery when we talk about Infinite Jest. We talk about lots of other works by Wallace too, but I would say like you can listen to most of our episodes without getting tremendous plot spoilers.
Okay.
So something that we sort of shoot for. We don't assume that everyone who's listening has finished Infinite Jest. But I can't like fully guarantee that, so don't quote me. Like there might be like there might be the odd tip there, but yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So Dave Laird, Great Concavity Podcast. Remind us again where we can find you online.
Yeah, you can check us out at greatconcavity.podbean.com or whatever podcast platform you use, like Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or whatever. Like, search us. We are there. On Twitter, we're at Concavity Show, same as on Instagram, and you can just search us on Facebook. And yeah, we're pretty easy to find on a Google search. I think the first Great Concavity hit is like the Wikipedia entry for Great Concavity in Infinite Jest, but after that, I think we're pretty close down. So
okay, that's good. That's good SEO results, as long as you're on the first page,
Yeah. I think we're doing okay on that. I've never paid a company to like get us higher or anything, so
good. Don't give them the money. They're criminals.
Yeah.
All right.
I tend to agree.
All right, Dave, thank you for doing the podcast. I am
you're welcome. Thanks so much for
recording,
having me.
But you and I can keep chatting for a sec. All right. See you guys.